Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amir Rochalina.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast is brought to you by Holland Harnham Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Harnham Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. I'm joined today by Kirsty Mawhinney. Kirsty is the founder of Skin Insight, a brand agency specialising in developing niche beauty brands for startup companies in the UK and abroad. From working as a beautician in cruise ships to becoming the head skin therapist at Clarins, what's unique about Kirsty is how she draws on her diverse professional experience to help her clients find their story brand and successfully speak to their target audience. And be sure to listen to the end, where Kirsty shares some insights into her personal story and how growing up as the daughter of a white professional football player in apartheid-era South Africa has influenced her views on life. So whether you're interested in knowing more about the business side of the skincare industry, or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful independent business, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Welcome, Kirsty Mawhinney, to the Inside Kingston podcast. Kirsty, I'm really excited about this conversation because, well, for one, I have no knowledge of the skincare industry, much less how one would go about building a brand in that sector. So it's really great to get a chance to talk to an expert on the subject. And I also think that there are many useful lessons in that, which our listeners who run their own businesses can learn a lot from. But to kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. So where did you grow up?
Well, firstly, Amir, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's great to meet you and be given this platform to introduce myself and a little bit about my business, Skin Insight. I think straight off the bat, people are always trying to figure out my accent and where I'm from. And it's generally Antipodean people, not quite sure if it's South African, Australia, or New Zealand. So I'll kind of take the guesswork out and say I'm from South Africa.
Right.
I grew up in Johannesburg, which is a really dynamic city, the city of gold, the gold mining city. Very interesting city to live in, especially during a highly political time such as apartheid.
Yeah.
It was an interesting place to live and experience. A little bit of background about that time was that my dad played professional football, or we call it soccer actually, and so I had the fortunate opportunity of being very easily integrated into black subculture because soccer was not a white man's sport.
Oh, wow.
And so it was played in the townships. And so it was kind of not the done thing for white people to go into the townships. And we would go and watch my dad play in these townships like Soweto, which is where Nelson Mandela lived before he was imprisoned. So it was quite an interesting childhood because, it was definitely very different from some of my white friends. And so, I got to understand from a young age the disparity and the divisions that were caused by apartheid. Yet we had black friends and we had an understanding and a community within this black subculture, which was very interesting.
That sounds fascinating. And South Africa, I haven't had a chance yet to go and visit, but it just strikes me as a country that has so many diverse cultural elements to it, that it just seems to me that you benefited from quite a bit of that growing up, which is amazing, Kirsty. Did you go to university? And if so, what did you study?
Well, I didn't go to university. I was at a really good school, so I can't say that my schooling didn't set me up, because I went to an all-girls private school in South Africa, Johannesburg, called Parktown Girls. And I did reasonably well at school, but I dropped maths and science. So I didn't carry those subjects through. So that kind of put me on a back foot. And to be fair, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I was probably veering towards nursing. And my mum and dad insisted I go and visit a career counsellor. And after having gone and done a kind of a trial session of nursing in one of the black hospitals in Soweto called Baragwanath, I wasn't quite keen on the blood and the gore. So I opted for something called beauty therapy or somatology, which in South Africa is a 3-year foundation degree. And I studied that through a subsidiary of our university, which was a technical educational facility. So you're kind of learning a trade, so as to speak. I have made a fantastic career out of this qualification. So very privileged to have been kind of pushed down that career path.
Yeah, so that's quite fascinating there, Kirsty. Could you tell us a little bit about your career journey before you set up your business?
Yeah, so I've had a really diverse career. It's actually quite interesting, because out of the students that I qualified with at the end of my 3-year journey of studying, there are probably around 5 out of 80 of us that are still within the industry today. So it's not always that easy to stay in it and become successful in it. But mainly what I studied was practical skills of being a beauty therapist, so doing facials and traditional massage. And I also studied some holistic modalities such as aromatherapy, manual lymphatic drainage, and reflexology.
Wow.
Interestingly, this took me around the world, because I worked on the cruise ships for 2 years. And I got to do world cruising. So I got to stand on the North Pole, and I got to stand on the South Pole, and I've been through the Panama Canal twice. I've been down to the Amazon. I mean, I've had a fabulous opportunity in this career. I've also worked in the professional sector with very established companies. My first company I worked for was Clarins. And I worked for them in South Africa, and I was part of the professional team there, so doing professional facials on journalists and what you would probably call an influencer today, but people of celebrity status. And then I got involved in the marketing team there and helped to create fantastic campaigns for Clarins in South Africa. And yeah, the alphabet of brands just can roll off my tongue now, because if you name a skincare company, I've worked for them, from Clarins through to Aveda with an Estee Lauder Corporation, Dermalogica. I've worked for Dr. Hauschka. I've worked for Niels Yard Remedies. I've worked within the L'Oreal Group. I've also had the opportunity to work with Ren Skincare and be global spa trainer there, and traveled the world and worked in the top spas in Asia. So a fantastically diverse career.
That's really interesting, Kirsty. And there's quite a bit in that I want to unpack throughout this conversation. Yeah. But what strikes me initially as just quite remarkable is how you've taken this career into your own hands, and through sheer hard work, you've basically built the pathway that leads us pretty much to the present. So could you tell us about a little bit about your business as it is today?
Yeah, so I run what I have called a brand building agency, Skin Insight. My business came about very organically. It wasn't something I woke up one day and said, I'm going to set up a business. I wish that were the case, and I wish I had a clear business plan, and I wish that it was as clean cut and as simple as that, and that I could say I'm an entrepreneur and this was my destiny. But it evolved very organically. And I can really say I am where I am today because I'm a mother. I struggled to have a baby. It took us 9 years. I finally did manage to have a baby. I was working in corporate life. I was very comfortable with the company I was working for. I was working for Godrej, which is a global international brand company based in India. And we buy dead and dying skincare, hair care, nail care, sun care products and revive them. So a brand like Touch of Silver, which was a Swatchcough brand, we took over and acquired and revived it. We've had brands like Cuticura, which was an antibacterial hand gel product, which has got a 150-year heritage. So it was a really interesting place to work. Wow. And during my maternity leave, I was very privileged to be given an easy adjustment back to corporate life. So 3 days a week I was in corporate life, and 2 days a week I was at home with my baby after my maternity leave. But very quickly, as I am a little bit of a workaholic, I started saying to people, oh, I've got 2 days available. And I started finding that I was getting involved in projects, mainly creating training protocols, working out some strategy presentations for pitching meetings with buyers, and then offering some direction for brands who were starting out in the industry. And it was quite interesting because I was negotiating with my existing company to go back to full-time role. And when I started telling the people I'd been doing some consultancy work for that this was the case, everybody turned around and said, but why would you do that? And I was like, well, I don't know. And they were like, if you took this full time, we would definitely have you. So it kind of came about really from the necessity of my clients. And I suppose, I was just in the right place, had great opportunity, had great network of people who saw that I could add value. And so the need of Skin Insight really came from that opportunity.
So full disclosure here, Kirsty, because I've had a chance to speak with you about your business previously, and I think that you are one of the hardest working people I've ever met. Your drive is just incredible. So let's just break this down for our listeners here. And this is why I think there are quite a few lessons that folks from other business sectors can draw from this conversation and apply into their own businesses. So you today are helping skincare products from abroad that would like to start building a presence in the UK to actually figure out how to do that.
Exactly. Mainly my client base is an international brand trying to launch into the UK market. And just to take a step back for people who are not in the skincare sector, the UK, as is the States, as is the German market and the French market, are probably like the four most challenging markets to build a successful skincare brand in. They kind of say if you win in the UK, it's easier to go to the States. If you win in the UK, it's easier to go to Germany. If you win in the UK, it's easier to go to France. So having a launch pad and being successful in this market is very powerful for the success of the skincare brand or hair care brand or any cosmetic brand.
Wow. Could you give us some examples of client cases that you've worked on and how you've helped them?
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to work with established very successful brands within the marketplace who are owned by a larger corporation. So I've worked with a brand which is called Nav Expert. Nav Expert Lab Paris is a French brand, and it's owned by a larger organization called Thelgo Group. This brand has huge backing, huge support, yet it's had some challenging times to arrive into the UK. It arrived in 2013. It was with a distributor. It sort of stayed here for a short period of time, and just there was no traction. Something was not right what the distributor was doing, so the brand exited the market. And I got to meet the brand founder in 2015. He was very skeptical of the UK. He wasn't convinced that the UK was able to take his brand in the right way. And so my first remit for him was to find a distributor. And a distributor generally is a company that will buy your stock and take over the brand entirely and represent it as their own in the local market. So that was what I was asked to do. And after going around town and meeting with several different distributor companies, I would sit in boardroom meetings, and at the end of the boardroom meeting, everybody would turn around and say, Kirsty, fabulous brand, fabulous everything. Everything was there, from the marketing support, the collateral, the credibility of the product, the packaging, the price point, the celebrity endorsements around the world. Everything was there, but what was not there was brand awareness in the UK. And everybody said, Kirsty, you sound like you love this brand. You sound like you've got it in your hand. Why don't you go out there and put it into the market and come back to us in 3 or 4 years' time? And that's generally what is the biggest issue, is that when you've got something that is of zero knowledge base to the UK customer, it requires quite a substantial investment from marketing to get it to some level of brand awareness. And so that's exactly what I did. I took the brand and I went around to different retailers on the high street, and I very quickly got a Boots listing. I got a QVC UK listing. So we were on air with QVC, which is obviously a huge opportunity. I mean, QVC are known as launching brands like Elemis and Liz Earle 25 years ago. So to be given that opportunity is gold. And then I acquired some other e-commerce listings for the brand. There are a number of challenges to going with particular retailers. So a Boots listing may sound like a success, but it requires a lot of complexity in actually getting that ball rolling from an investment point of view, and how much margin Boots will take. So in the end, the brand owner decided not to go with Boots, but that didn't diminish my success of landing that, because getting into Boots is not an easy feat, No. So that's kind of I would say, an easy story, because everything to do with that brand was there already, and it really just required somebody who was on the ground and had the right contacts to go in and talk about the brand. So I really enjoyed that client. I've had other clients, a Swiss client who was a very high-end luxury brand, very established in Switzerland, practically unknown anywhere else in the world. And this client had a very specific criteria of where she wanted the brand to be represented. She gave me only 5 accounts that she considered worthy of her brand. One of them, of course, being Harrods.
Right.
Another one being the Ritz Hotel, which would give a beauty salon, and the Lanesborough in London, and Urban Retreat in Harrods as well. So I had a very tough challenge with this client, because there were other opportunities that would help bring about some sales, help to build the brand awareness, bring about some PR, but the client wasn't interested in any of that, only in these particular sellouts. And it was an interesting experience working with this client, because I couldn't get those retailers on board, not because I didn't have the address book or the client relationship. I was having FaceTime with these different accounts, but I was getting particular feedback that the client didn't necessarily want to hear. And sometimes I'm what I call the naysayer. I get to tell clients what they don't want to hear about their product. And so we went on an interesting journey on this brand. And interestingly, 2 years after representing them, they acquired a listing at the Lanesborough Spa. So sometimes the lead time is quite long between meeting a client and then going out, taking the product around, meeting with different customers, and seeking opportunities. It can be anything from immediately to 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, and that's what I find fascinating about this conversation, Kirsty, is just how applicable what you've just said is to so many different industries. So let's try to unpack some of that for our listeners. What are some of the tips that you give to our listeners from whatever field they're in, who are perhaps starting to plan their own brand story?
I think the key tip for me is what I would say, do you have a one-liner or the elevator pitch? I think often we want to fill too much in and we want to share everything. But actually, you just need a very short statement. For myself, I call myself a brand building agency. And I think brand building is exactly what I do. There are many elements to that, but it's quite simple. I think we also meet too many people that have a similar story. There have been lots of successful companies out there. I think of Richard Branson's Virgin Atlantic. I think you need to be uniquely different. No matter what you're doing, if you're doing something that everybody else is doing, I don't know, you're selling a carton of milk and there are millions of milk brands out there. What is unique about your milk brand and your journey and your story? I think that's a very important tip. Just keep it short and sweet and find a very definitive difference in your story. And then I think it's about persistence and grit. I think these two words I couldn't use enough, really. I think it's about being brave and doing things that you wouldn't normally do. So gone are the days where we do lead sales, where we pick up a telephone and we try and call somebody to get an opportunity. That's gone. Mm-hmm. Sending out an email and having an email land in the buyer's inbox when she has 700 emails a day, that's also not going to work.
Yeah.
So for me, what works is finding out who I want to meet, where are they at any given moment. Yeah. So I try and follow them on LinkedIn. I try and see what events they're going to be talking at. Where do they hang out? I even have met people in the car park. So I'm quite a committed person. If I want something from somebody, I'm not shy to ask. And what's the worst that's going to happen? Somebody will say no.
Absolutely. And Kirsty, let's look at the other side of that coin. What are some of the common mistakes that you see when companies are trying to build their brand, say, in a new market?
I think the biggest mistake that I see is expectation is too high. You may be a very big brand in a different market, or you may think because you've given birth to this product that it is, a revolutionary concept and it's your baby and everybody needs to kind of get on board with this product. And why isn't everybody? But I really think you need to have realistic expectations. And I think you need to meet people who are experts in the particular industry, like myself, who can very quickly look at the story and the concepts and the deliverables that are there and say, this is where your strength is and this is where the weakness is. And, I play up to these strengths and I would minimize these weaknesses. And I would also identify what is completely, I often do something called a brand map, which is where in the market are you placing your brand that is completely, there is space for your brand in the market. In a skincare market, the market is so congested already. We need to kind of find space on the shelf for the product. So a brand map, which kind of gives you a little bit of an island for your product, and shows the space in the market for your product and why your product deserves that space is key.
Kirsty, you mentioned LinkedIn there a second ago, and we're both connected on LinkedIn, and I noticed that you're very active on that social media platform, but in quite an interesting way, because you really interact with other professionals in your network. So could you share with us your thought process on using social media, not only to maintain professional relationships, but also to attract new business as well?
Yeah, it's interesting because LinkedIn for me, I think I was an early adopter. I was probably on LinkedIn probably around 2005, 2006. I was an early adopter, and I've learned a lot by just being there and being in the space. I've definitely grown my network, and I can honestly say, hand on heart, that LinkedIn is a key value tool to me and my business and how I support my clients. I use LinkedIn religiously. I think what's so important is to understand what's going on within your industry and to respond to the successes of others, and not always be pushing out what you need. I actually don't do much of that. I could probably do a lot more of promoting myself on LinkedIn, which I think is an area I want to develop and focus on more, have a clearer strategy of pushing out some of my case studies, some of my wins. I think that's an area I need to improve on. But having a look at LinkedIn on a regular basis, seeing what's happening, often I will find out that there's an event or a talk that I need to go to, and it's happening and being promoted on LinkedIn. And if I didn't look on LinkedIn, I wouldn't have a clue that it was happening. So that's important. I also think you learn from your colleagues and from your peers. If somebody's having a success in an area, I definitely congratulate them, but I will even reach out to them independently and say, geez, how did you win that? Give me some reasons why that was successful for you, because it wasn't successful for me on 3 occasions. Yeah. And I'm quite vulnerable. I like to be quite vulnerable and share the challenges of business, because I think business is not easy, and I think you need to ask for help. And I often reach out to people outside of my industry through LinkedIn and say, I'd like 5 minutes of your time to run this past you. I'm thinking of this pitch and I really need an outsider view. Would you have some time for me? And it's fantastic, the support I've gotten on LinkedIn. So I highly recommend it. If you're not on LinkedIn, you should be.
That's great. Kirsty, what are some of the key business lessons that you've learned throughout your life?
I'm still learning. I think setting up a business, I became a limited company in 2016, and it's not been easy. I think because I didn't have, as I said, a business plan to start with, it came very organically. So I think some of my mistakes have been, instead of representing the client, which is what I've always kind of done, I've taken the client as my business first, and I've pushed myself in the background. And it's taken me probably, I think 2018 was the first time I realized that I am actually a brand in itself, Skin Insight. Yeah. And my brand is very important to my future clients. And so I've kind of restructured things. So I definitely think I'm still learning. I'm on the journey. I would say that for other businesses, you need to have a very clear understanding of your budget, of your financials. I think a good accountant is essential. And thank you very much. You've given me a reference to Alida Ballard from Surrey Accounting Services, who I'm now working with. So that's very exciting for me. And I think that's going to take me into a different dimension with my business, because having an understanding of the numbers is essential. But when you're a small business owner, you're often running from client to client, and you don't actually focus on that as much as you should. Absolutely. So, very important lessons to be learnt and still learning.
For sure. Yeah, we're kindred spirits there. Always learning as well, Kirsty.
Yeah.
When you look back at your career journey to date, what are you most proud of?
I think I'm most proud of my mentors. I've had some fantastic mentors guide me and support me on my journey. And those relationships are still existing today. And I think we often forget that people buy from people, and I think relationships are integral to the success of any business. So I think my mentors have been the thing I'm the most proud of, the relationships I have there and the ability to tap into that expertise at any time of the day or night.
That's fantastic. That's really, really great, Kirsty. What next for you and your business? Are there any projects in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
I've got a whole actually restructuring happening in my business.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's. I think I'm at that 3-year curve in my business, and I'm really excited about the future and what's coming. And I've put together now for the first time a business plan, and I've got some understanding of what I want to achieve. So the key thing for me going forward is that I'm creating a business model where clients can come to me for a year of support, 1 year of support, and sign up for a subscription. And within that subscription, they will get what I call different silos or pillars of expertise.
Okay.
So for a year of support, they come into my business hub, and they are given 360 wraparound care for their brand on this journey. There's no commitment to stay with me after the year. And sometimes brands do leave me naturally because they are acquired or they grow into the next level. So I'm definitely what I call a launch pad for a brand.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea of giving this wraparound care to a business is really what I think is going to be beneficial to me and to my clients. And the one exciting thing that we're going to be offering is an e-commerce shop which will ship directly to customers.
Oh,
so
wow.
You won't have a UK presence in this market, and I won't have to run around to a retailer. You'll just immediately be given a shop presence and be already being shipped out to domestic customers, which will start to build a journey of brand awareness on social media platforms with influencers and affiliates and collab relationships.
That sounds really, really interesting, Kirsty.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Absolutely. As we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So, Kirsty, what do you do to relax outside of the office?
I'm a little bit of a person that likes to do many things. I have many feathers in my cap, and I think the important thing to emphasize here is that I am in the skincare industry, and well-being is very much integrated into that sector. Spa treatments, self-care, and nurturing of yourself. So I have qualified 2 years ago as a yoga teacher, and I practice yoga myself. I have been practicing yoga since I was in my early teens. My mum is a yoga teacher, so I was brought up with this fantastic practice in my home, and incorporated it in my life, and it's been a great tool to bring balance and harmony to my daily life. Not only do I practice the physical postures of yoga, but I also like to live the yoga philosophy. And within yoga, there are different life skills that you need to adopt, and they called the yamas and the niyamas. And one of them is ahimsa, which is do no harm. So I'm a vegetarian. I also, in my younger years, I was a fruitarian and a vegan. So I've done all the extremes. And I also believe very much in satya, which is being truthful, carrying this throughout your day. And very importantly, I use breath work, which is called pranayama, breath techniques, to help to reset myself throughout the day and rebalance my energy levels. So yoga is definitely something I do daily, if not hourly, to keep balance and harmony in my life. And I also teach yoga classes from my home studio, as well as offer community classes. So I teach a free class in West Molesey Community Centre on a monthly basis. And I'm going to probably be doing another free class at a church in Kingston upon Thames in the coming years. So that's very exciting.
That's very exciting. That's really, really, really valuable stuff as well, in the way you can give back some of your expertise to the community. So thank you for that, Kirsty.
Yeah.
Are there any books that you've recently read that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I don't stop reading. I love the fact that we can now have books on our phone, and I've constantly got at least 6 or 7 books that I'm reading simultaneously. I've become recently absorbed into poetry, actually, and really taking poetry to heart and using it in my meditations. And I've come across a fantastic chap. His name is Mark Nepo. And he's written many books, but the one that I'm drawn to at the moment is 7,000 Ways to Listen.
Okay.
It's a fantastic book because I always hear my grandmother saying you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And I think sometimes we don't listen enough, to the people that we're engaging with. Right now your audience is listening to us, which is great. But when we're with people, are we actively listening? So Mark Nepo is featured on Super Soul Sunday with Oprah Winfrey. He's highly regarded, and I suggest your audience tap into some of Mark's books because he's fabulous.
That's a great recommendation.
There's another book I want to recommend. It's a book called Minimalism, and it's also says A Life Worth Living, and the authors are Joshua Fields, Milburn, and Ryan Nicodemus. So that's Minimalism, A Life Worth Living. And I've definitely tapped into this book 3 years ago now, and just really believe that this is the future, not only with regards our current situation of climate issues and sustainability and the impact that we're having in consumerism, but I think when you remove clutter in your life, in your home, in your space, not only in your brain, you become a much more easier human being to engage with and find calmness in your space. So minimalism, I highly recommend it as a concept.
Thank you for that. Are there any movies or TV shows that you recently watched that you'd recommend to our listeners?
I have to be honest, The Crown came out on Sunday, so that definitely had me for 1 or 2 clips. I definitely watched that on Netflix, but I'm not a great TV watcher. I tend to kind of wait for things like that to come out. I'm a fan of podcasts. I listen to them often. Mm-hmm. I listen to many podcasts, but one that I would mention to your audience is Tim Ferriss. Yeah. I don't know if everybody knows Tim, but he's a fabulous guy based out in the States, and he's written The 4-Minute Work Week a number of years ago, and he's actually considered to be ranked as the #1 podcaster on Apple Podcasts. So yeah, Tim Ferriss is one to look out for. And then I often will watch TED Talks, stream it off my app. Do you know TED Talks, Amir?
I do, and I highly recommend that. So I'm glad you mentioned TED Talks, Kirsty.
Yeah.
Feel free to give the audience a summary of what those are.
Yeah, so TED Talks stands for Technology, Entertainment and Design, and it's a particular timed presentation that somebody is asked to deliver. But there are world leaders, powerful people, industry people, and then just people, normal people who are doing revolutionary things out there in the space of technology, entertainment, and design. People who are in the research field working with cancer, people looking at how we're going to live in the future. It's just a dynamic place to be. And if you're ever lacking inspiration in your working day, or you want to have some motivation, I just say log on to TED Talks, because you'll be fired up in no time.
I absolutely second that. Finally, where can people go to find out more about you and your business?
I would say at the moment, LinkedIn is probably the best place. My website is currently under reconstruction, as I mentioned, this subscription model and this e-commerce shop. So we're hoping to have that up and running by end of January. But LinkedIn, I would say, is the first port of call. Connect with me there.
For the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure that I link up your LinkedIn account on the show notes.
Great.
Kirsty, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Well, thanks, Amir. Thanks for having me on. And I'm looking forward to hearing and meeting people in the local community. I'm happy to kind of talk to anybody, even somebody outside my industry. So, yeah. That's
fantastic. Thank you. That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.